Trump is basically the antithesis of summit diplomacy when every president and prime minister gets to have 5 minutes to make his speech. He hates that stuff. So as a result, I think that NATO in 2019, and here again repeating it in 2025, has come up with a good model to make sure that all the work gets done as it should beforehand, that the accomplishments are there, that the leaders come together, and that the real conversations take place on the sidelines in the kind of private and quiet conversations among and between leaders.
Donald Trump has, as we've been hearing, arrived at The Hague for the NATO summit tonight and predictably has already made everyone nervous. He refused to answer a question on whether he was still in support of Article 5. That's the article or the condition that they run to the aid of others if they've been attacked. He's also been pushing European countries, including the UK, to commit to spending 5% of their GDP on defence. Earlier today, we heard that Spain was looking for an exemption from this, and the president suggested he was less than happy with that idea. Rose Gottemoeller is a former Deputy Secretary General of NATO and former Under Secretary of State for the International Security Affairs, and is on the line now. Good evening to you, Rose.
Good evening to you.
Thank you.
Nice to be with you.
Very nice for you to join us this evening. Ahead on the eve of this, well, I suppose it's this 2-day summit, but frankly today was just people arriving on planes and not doing much together. We'll see what tomorrow brings. They are, of course, mostly focused attention on the US president. What do you think he is going to be hoping to be this summit to be known for? Is it as Mark Rutte in those leaked texts that Donald Trump seems to have released, putting the efforts to get to the 5%, all the plaudits for that? Will Trump be looking just to sort of clean up?
Well, I have to admit, I feel a prickle of nervousness as I was DSG at NATO in Trump's first term. And 2017, the summit in May, and 2018, the summit in June, were pretty nearly disasters because, as you know, Trump loves to keep people off balance, and he will do everything he can to keep people off balance and guessing because he wants, obviously, the headlines in all the newspapers, and he's succeeding at that very, very well. Well, it actually would have been a big headline if he had suddenly embraced Article 5 and said, absolutely, I'm committed
Yes,
to the NATO alliance. But somehow I just don't expect that from him. He's going to continue to dangle uncertainty about the U.S. role in support of NATO. But I do want to say that in the run-up to this summit meeting, the U.S. administration, including Donald Trump, seemed to be more satisfied with NATO than they have been in the past. And I noticed Marco Rubio today, the Secretary of State, talking in quite positive ways, and Trump himself prepared to give the allies credit for stepping up to this 5% of GDP mark. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, but nevertheless, I think that the alliance has prepared well for this summit.
Well, you've been there, you've been in that room. So is that really what happened? There is a sort of holding of breath, really, that you try to pre-cook everything as best you can, perhaps keep the actual time for incidents to happen quite limited. I mean, it is only a couple of hours, we understand, that leaders are going to be talking to each other. Is the hope that actually this summit will be deemed a success if everyone arrives, smiles for the camera, says yes to 5% and leaves?
Well, I do want to point out that this innovation of a short summit came from Jens Stoltenberg. And he said in 2019, when NATO was having yet another summit meeting and worried after the really near meltdown in 2018, that the summit needed to adjust to Trump and his real dislike of sitting around and listening to everybody else give long speeches. So Trump is basically the antithesis of summit diplomacy when every president and prime minister gets to have 5 minutes to make his speech. He hates that stuff. So as a result, I think that NATO in 2019, and here again repeating it in 2025, has come up with a good model to make sure that all the work gets done as it should beforehand, that the accomplishments are there, that the leaders come together, and that the real conversations take place on the sidelines in the kind of private and quiet conversations among and between leaders. So to my mind, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be very boring sitting at a summit plenary table, I can tell you.
I've been at many boring tables. I'm sure yours is fascinating compared to others. Look, how much these side talk? Obviously, one side conversation people would be interested to see if it takes place is that between Donald Trump and Zelensky. And is there an opportunity now that, at least in Trump's mind, he's solved the Iran-Israel problem in the short term, that he might want to now keep that momentum and suggest that there's some progress towards the talks between Russia and Ukraine?
I hope so. And I was glad to see, I haven't seen it confirmed yet, maybe you've seen it confirmed, but that it seems like Zelensky and Trump will have at least a quiet,
A brush by, I think they can call it sometimes, can't they?
pull aside is
Pull
the
aside.
technical
Oh,
term.
okay.
Yes, where they have a chance to speak. And I think the model is that very serious conversation you saw them having on the margins of Pope Francis's funeral a few months ago when they sat down in the Vatican. And I hope they have the chance for that kind of private and serious conversation again, because I think Zelensky has some important messages for Trump, particularly with regard to the way that Ukrainian tech industry and defense industry they are surging ahead with new technologies that will really form the future of military capability and capacity, not only for Ukraine, but also for Ukraine, also for NATO. And the United States, I think, should have a role in bringing that promise to fruition. And so I think, and as we all know, the minerals deal is still very much something that Zelensky's willing to offer up to Trump, the rare earths deal. So I think they have much to talk about, and the temperatures come down now since their horrible meeting back in February in the Oval Office. So in general, I'm hoping for some progress in just those two men getting to know each other and being able to work together.
What's your impression of the general health of NATO as more countries, and European in particular, have realised that their spending levels do need to rise? They seem to have brought their populations and their voters with them on that. Has NATO measurably felt more secure in recent weeks than it might have done a year or so ago?
Yeah, I always give Trump credit in his first term in lighting a fire under the NATO allies and saying you cannot free ride on the United States anymore. The United States is not going to provide for your defense if you're not taking responsibility too. So that was a super important, I would say, push that he gave in his first term in office. But this latest push is all on the back of Putin's aggression against Ukraine and the threats that he has posed to the NATO alliance. And there's been some very stark language out of the Kremlin today about how, NATO is making this all up. Well, no, they're not making it all up. Russia has been aggressive and has invaded an independent European state twice in the past decade and a half. So I think it's very important at this point that the NATO allies have got that message firm and clear. And so that is the basis upon which they've agreed to this 5% increase in defense spending on defense capabilities, but also on defense infrastructure. And so it's a combination of the push from Trump, but also the real threat from Russia, I think, that has created this turnaround. And it's a huge change from 10 years ago when I was at NATO, where I think NATO was just kind of coasting along and not paying attention to their very real responsibilities to provide for their own defense and national security.
Certainly feels very serious now. Rose, thanks so much for joining us tonight. It was
My pleasure.
Nice to talk to you. That was Rose Gottemoeller, former Deputy Secretary General of NATO.